The laughter echoed across the upscale restaurant, harsh and jarring against the soft piano music. Miguel wiped down the marble tabletop with practiced movements, his eyes fixed on the task at hand. 6 years of working at La Costa had taught him how to become nearly invisible, how to serve with a smile while pretending not to hear the comments, the jokes, the assumptions. Tonight was different, though. Something in the air felt charged, like the heaviness before a storm. "I'm telling you, this place tries too hard," a woman's voice cut through the ambient noise. "All this fancy decor, but the service is so, you know." Miguel glanced up briefly. The new arrivals had been seated in his section, 4 of them, designer clothes, expensive watches, that particular loudness that comes with feeling entitled to attention. The hostess handed them menus with an apologetic look in Miguel's direction. The man at the head of the table, red-faced with a gold watch that caught the light with every exaggerated gesture, leaned back in his chair. "Well, Stacy, that's what you get in these places. They hire whoever will work for pennies." More laughter, the kind that's meant to be heard by others. Miguel straightened his black vest, tucked his cleaning cloth into his apron pocket, and approached. Their table. His posture was perfect, shoulders back, chin up, the way his grandfather, a former military man, had taught him, the way he'd carried himself when he'd stood before lecture halls filled with students. "Good evening and welcome to La Costa," Miguel said, his accent deliberately thickened. It was what they expected, after all. "My name is Miguel, and I will be your server tonight. May I start you with some drinks?" The red-faced man barely looked up from his phone. "Yeah, whatever. 4 margaritas. You guys do margaritas here, right?" "Since you know," he gestured vaguely at Miguel. His companions snickered. The blonde woman, Stacy, touched the man's arm playfully. "Brad, stop!" But she was laughing too. Miguel nodded, face carefully blank. "Of course, sir, 4 margaritas. Would you like to hear our specials while I prepare your drinks?" "Sure, why not?" Brad said, finally looking up with a smirk. "Just speak slowly." "Okay, amigo, so we can understand you." Miguel's hand tightened slightly around his notepad, but his expression remained pleasant. "Today's special is a pan-seared Chilean sea bass with a saffron risotto and grilled asparagus." "Saffron? Asparagus?" Brad repeated, exaggerating each syllable and looking to his friends for approval. They delivered with more laughter. Miguel simply nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll be right back with your drinks." As he walked away, he heard Brad's voice carrying across the restaurant. $10 says he doesn't even know what asparagus is. Probably just memorized it phonetically. In the bar area, Miguel prepared the margaritas with precise movements. Salt the rims, pour the tequila, squeeze fresh lime juice. His colleague Lucia approached, eyebrows raised. "Trouble at table 7? She asked quietly in Spanish. Miguel shrugged, not breaking his rhythm. "Nothing new." Lucia glanced over at Brad's table, then back to Miguel. "You know, someday you're going to stop pretending, and I want front row seats when it happens." Miguel allowed himself a small smile. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lucia rolled her eyes. "Right, because all waiters read quantum physics, books on their breaks." Before Miguel could respond, the restaurant manager, Mr. Davis, approached. "Everything okay over here?" "Yes, sir," Miguel replied. "Just preparing drinks for table 7. Mr. Davis glanced toward Brad's table and frowned. Slightly. "Those folks seem a bit boisterous. Let me know if there's any trouble." Miguel nodded, appreciating the subtle show of support. In his 6 years at La Costa, Mr. Davis had always been fair, even protective of his staff. He was one of the reasons Miguel had stayed so long. Drinks balanced on his tray, Miguel returned to the table, where the conversation abruptly halted. Brad looked up with an exaggerated smile. "Ah, there he is. Margaritas for everyone." He gestured, grandly. "You make these the authentic way, right, Miguel? Like back home?" Miguel set the drinks down carefully. "Yes, sir. These are made with premium tequila, fresh lime juice, and agave nectar." The younger man at the table, wearing a polo shirt with the collar popped, snorted. "Agave nectar, fancy words for a waiter." "Are you ready to order, or would you like more time with the menu?" Miguel asked, ignoring the comment. "I need a translation first," said the second woman, who hadn't spoken until now. She had sleek, dark hair and a diamond tennis bracelet that sparkled under the restaurant lights. "What exactly is a ceviche? Is that how you say it?" Miguel nodded. Ceviche is raw fish cured in citrus juice, typically with herbs and chili peppers. Ours is made with fresh halibut, lime juice, cilantro, and serrano peppers. "Raw fish?" The woman wrinkled her nose. "Isn't that like dangerous, especially if it's made by—" She stopped herself, but her implication hung in the air. Brad laughed loudly. "What Diana means is, can we trust the kitchen staff to handle raw fish properly? No offense. I assure you our chef has over 20 years of experience and the highest food safety certification," Miguel replied evenly. Brad waved his hand dismissively. Yeah, look, just bring us some nachos to start and then steaks for everyone. Medium for the ladies, medium rare for us men." "Nachos aren't actually on our menu, sir," Miguel said, "but I can recommend our antojitos platter, which includes quesadillas, empanadas, and—" "Fine, whatever," Brad interrupted. "Just bring us something Mexican. That's what this place is, right? Upscale Mexican?" Miguel took a deep breath. La Costa is actually a Mediterranean fusion restaurant with Latin American influences. Our chef is from Barcelona. The table went quiet for a moment. Then Brad burst into laughter. "Listen to him. Mediterranean fusion with Latin American influences. They've got you well trained, haven't they, Miguel?" The collar-popped young man joined in. "Dude, $10 says he doesn't even know what fusion means. He's just repeating what they told him to say." Miguel wrote down their orders without responding. 6 years of this. 6 years of biting his tongue, of playing into their expectations because it was easier, because he needed the job, because making waves wasn't worth the trouble. "I'll put these orders in right away," he said, tucking his notepad into his pocket. "Gracias. Amigo," Brad called after him, prompting more laughter from the table. In the kitchen, Miguel handed the order to the chef, a stern Catalan man named Javier, who ran his kitchen with military precision. "Table 7 wants 4 steaks," Miguel said, "and they asked for nachos, so I'm putting in an order for the antojitos platter." Javier raised an eyebrow. "Americans?" "Tourists," Miguel confirmed. "Ah." Javier nodded knowingly. "The ones making all the noise. They are being difficult." Miguel shrugged. "Nothing I can't handle." Javier studied him for a moment. "You know, Miguel, sometimes I wonder why you put up with it. A man with your—" "It's fine, Javier." Miguel cut him off gently. "Let's just get their food out quickly so they can eat and leave." As Miguel turned to go, Lucia caught his arm. "They're at it again," she warned. "The loud one is doing an impression of you now." Miguel looked out through the kitchen doors. Sure enough, Brad was speaking in an exaggerated accent, hand gestures, and all while his companions doubled over with laughter. "Mediterranean fusion with Latin flavors," Brad mocked, drawing out the vowels. "I'm Miguel. I carry plates for a living but use fancy words." Something inside Miguel shifted. A small crack in the dam he'd built years ago. "Let it go," he told himself. "Just a few more hours and they'll be gone." When the appetizers were ready, Miguel carried them out with his usual professional demeanor. As he approached table 7, he could hear their conversation. "Seriously, though," the popped collar guy was saying, "my dad's company tried hiring some of these guys for the warehouse, and none of them could follow basic instructions in English. Had to fire the whole lot. That's the problem with immigration these days," Brad replied sagely, as if he were discussing complex geopolitics. "They come here, but they don't even try to assimilate. Like, learn the language if you're going to live here, right?" Miguel placed the platter on the table with a gentle thud. "Your antojitos platter," he announced. "The empanadas are filled. With spiced beef, the quesadillas have Oaxaca cheese and wild mushrooms, and the tostadas are topped with avocado and crab." "Wow, you memorized all that?" Stacy asked, genuinely impressed. Brad wasn't having it. "So, Miguel," he said, leaning forward with a smug smile, "how long have you been in America? Your English is, well, it's coming along." Miguel hesitated. 6 years of turning the other cheek. 6 years of letting comments like this slide off his back. "I was born in San Diego, sir," he said simply. Brad blinked, caught off guard for just a moment before recovering. "But you're from, like, Mexico originally, right? I mean, your family." "My father was born in Guatemala. He came to the United States when he was 17. My mother is from New Mexico. Her family has been there for 7 generations. The table went quiet. This wasn't part of the script they'd written in their heads. "Huh," Brad said finally. "Well, you've got quite the accent for someone born here." Miguel nodded. "Yes, some people say that." He walked away, feeling their eyes on his back. In the kitchen, Lucia gave him a questioning look. What happened? They got quiet all of a sudden. Miguel just shook his head and checked on his other tables. The rest of the evening continued without incident. The four at table 7 subdued, but still occasionally making comments just loud enough for Miguel to hear as he passed. When it came time for dessert, Miguel approached with the menu. "Would you like to see our dessert offerings this evening?" Brad, who'd been drinking steadily throughout the meal, had regained his earlier bravado. "Sure thing, Miguel. But first," he gestured with his nearly empty wine glass, "I've been wondering. What's your story, man? You work here long?" 6 years, Miguel answered. 6 years, Brad whistled. "That's commitment. What, no other skills to move up in the world?" Diana giggled. "Brad, don't be mean." "I'm not being mean," Brad protested. "I'm just curious. 6 years as a waiter. That's a long time to carry plates, you know what I mean." Miguel could feel Lucia watching from across the room. Mr. Davis, too, had noticed the exchange and was slowly making his way over. "Before this," Miguel said, his voice level, "I was working on my doctorate." The table went silent again. "Your... what now?" the collar-popped man asked. "My doctorate," Miguel repeated. "In comparative literature with a focus on post-colonial theory and Latin American texts. Unfortunately, my father became ill, and I needed a more flexible schedule to help care for him while still supporting my family." He delivered this information matter-of-factly, the same way he would describe a special dish. Brad stared at him, wine glass frozen halfway to his mouth. "You're kidding, right?" Miguel reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he extracted a worn ID card and placed it on the table. The University of California seal was clearly visible, as was Miguel's name and the word doctoral candidate. "I was a teaching assistant as well," Miguel added. "I taught undergraduate courses in Spanish literature and advanced composition in English." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the surrounding tables had gone quiet, diners pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Brad cleared his throat. "Well, that's something. So all this time," Stacy said slowly, "you've been pretending to have an accent?" Miguel shook his head. "Not pretending, accommodating. People hear what they expect to hear. When I speak with my natural voice, customers often become uncomfortable or suspicious. They question my authenticity or assume I'm being pretentious." He smiled slightly. "It's simply easier this way." Mr. Davis had reached the table now. "Is everything all right here?" "Yes, sir," Miguel replied. "I was just sharing a bit about my background with these guests." Mr. Davis looked between Miguel and the now subdued table. "I see. Well, Miguel here is one of our most valuable employees. We're lucky to have him." Brad nodded stiffly. "Yeah, lucky." "Would you still like to see the dessert menu?" Miguel asked. "Just the check, please," Brad muttered. As Miguel walked away to prepare their bill, the weight of 6 years seemed to lift slightly from his shoulders. Behind him, he could hear Brad's hushed, defensive whispers to his companions. "How was I supposed to know?" He was talking with an accent the whole time. When Miguel returned with the check, he placed it on the table with his usual professionalism. "Thank you for dining with us tonight. I hope you enjoyed your meal." Brad signed the credit card slip without meeting Miguel's eyes, adding a tip that was exactly 15%. Not generous, but not insulting either. As the four gathered their belongings to leave, Brad finally looked up. "Look, man, I didn't mean to—" "It's quite all right," Miguel interrupted smoothly. His voice now carried no trace of an accent, his English as perfect and polished as any university professor's. "I hope you enjoy the rest of your vacation." The group filed out in awkward silence, but as they reached the door, the dark-haired woman, Diana, turned back. She approached Miguel where he was clearing their table. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That was really uncomfortable and, well, it wasn't right." Miguel studied her face, seeing genuine regret. "Thank you for saying that." She nodded, then hurried to catch up with her friends. As the restaurant began to empty for the night, Lucia sidled up to Miguel. "So," she said with a grin, "that happened?" Miguel laughed softly. "Yes, it did." "About time," she replied. "I've been waiting 6 years to see the real Miguel Alvarez in action." Mr. Davis approached them, a curious expression on his face. "That was quite something, Miguel. I don't think I've ever heard you speak without your accent before." Miguel shrugged. "It rarely seemed necessary." "Well," Mr. Davis said thoughtfully, "now that I know the full extent of your capabilities, I think we need to talk about your future. Here, my office, tomorrow at 10. After Mr. Davis walked away, Lucia nudged Miguel. "Sounds like a promotion to me." "We'll see," Miguel said. But he couldn't help the small smile tugging at his lips. Later that night, as Miguel walked home through the quiet streets, he pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Papa?" "Yes, everything's fine. Actually, better than fine." He switched to Spanish, his voice warm and animated. "Remember that teaching position at the community college I told you about? I think I'm going to apply after all." As he spoke, Miguel looked up at the night sky, at the stars, visible even through the city lights. For 6 years he had dimmed his own light, had made himself smaller to fit into the box others had created for him. Perhaps it was finally time to step out of it. The next morning, Miguel arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. He found Mr. Davis already in his office reviewing paperwork. "Miguel, come in," Mr. Davis greeted him. "Close the door, please." Miguel sat down, hands folded in his lap. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Mr. Davis leaned back in his chair. "I've been managing restaurants for 30 years, Miguel. I've seen all types come and go, but I've never quite figured you out." "Sir?" "6 years," Mr. Davis said, echoing Brad's words from the night before. 6 years of watching you pretend to be less than you are. Why?" Miguel considered the question. "When my father got sick, I needed steady income with flexible hours. La Costa provided that. The tips were good, especially if I played the role people expected." "And now?" Mr. Davis asked. "My father's health has improved. I've saved enough for him to have the care he needs, and perhaps—" Miguel paused. "Perhaps I'm tired of the role." Mr. Davis nodded slowly. "I thought so. That's why I've been meaning to talk to you for a while now." He pushed a folder across the desk. "I'm promoting you to front-of-house manager. The position comes with a significant salary increase and benefits." Miguel stared at the folder, speechless. "You're the most qualified person I know," Mr. Davis continued. "Your attention to detail, your way with people, even difficult ones, and clearly your education level is more than adequate." "I don't know what to say," Miguel managed. "Say yes," Mr. Davis replied with a smile. "Unless you have better offers elsewhere?" Miguel thought about the community college position, a part-time lecturer role that wouldn't pay nearly as well. "No, sir, this is perfect." As Miguel left the office with his new contract, he found Lucia waiting outside, pretending. "To polish glasses at the bar, so?" she demanded. "What happened?" Miguel held up the folder. "I'm the new front-of-house manager." Lucia squealed and threw her arms around him. "I knew it. This calls for celebration." Over her shoulder, Miguel saw the restaurant doors open. His heart sank slightly when he recognized Diana, the dark-haired woman from the previous night. She was alone this time, looking uncertain as she scanned the empty restaurant. Miguel disentangled himself from Lucia's hug. "I'll be right back." He approached Diana with a neutral expression. "Good morning. I'm afraid we don't open for lunch for another hour." Diana fidgeted with her purse strap. "I know. I was hoping to catch you, actually. Miguel, right?" He nodded. "Couldn't sleep last night," she said. "The way we treated you, the things Brad said—" She shook her head. "It was awful, and I'm truly sorry." "Thank you," Miguel said. "But you already apologized last night." "Not properly," she insisted. "And not just for myself. Brad's too proud to come back here, but he knows he was wrong too." Miguel raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Okay, maybe he doesn't fully get it yet," Diana admitted. "But after we left, we had a huge argument. I told him he was being an entitled jerk," she sighed. "Anyway, I wanted to give you this." She held out an envelope. Miguel hesitated, then took it. "It's not much," she said quickly. Just a gift card to that new bookstore downtown. You mentioned your doctorate in literature, so I thought... Miguel opened the envelope. Inside was a $100 gift card and a handwritten note that simply said, "I'm sorry. People are more than the boxes we put them in." "Thank you," Miguel said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "This is very thoughtful." Diana smiled, relieved. "Well, that's all I wanted to say. I won't take up any more of your time." As she turned to go, Miguel called after her. "Diana?" She looked back. "Would you like to stay for lunch, as my guest? Our chef makes an excellent paella." Diana's smile widened. "I'd like that very much." As Miguel showed her to a table, he caught Lucia's questioning look from across the room. He gave her a small shrug and a genuine smile, his first in a long time. Sometimes, he thought, people can surprise you. Sometimes they can even surprise themselves, and sometimes the roles we play become so comfortable that we forget they're just roles. It had taken 6 years and a table of rude tourists for Miguel to remember who he really was. Not just a waiter with an accent, but a scholar, a son, a teacher, a man of dignity and worth. As he handed Diana a menu, Miguel spoke in his natural voice, educated, articulate, and distinctly American. "Let me tell you about today's specials. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated because of their accent or appearance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories that remind us all to look beyond stereotypes and recognize the dignity in every person."